Today, we're talking with Penny McPhee, who is the former president of the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation, a well-known philanthropic nonprofit that has donated over $800 million to initiatives from early childhood development to the arts. Penny knew from an early age that she wanted to change the world and that writing was her talent. In this episode, we talk with Penny about her career in journalism and media, her influence in making the art collection at Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium worthy of a fine arts museum, and what she looks forward to for her next adventure. Penny first visited Serenbe before homes had been built, and she and her husband even joked about wondering if Steve's vision could work. Nearly 20 years later, that vision is realized, and the McPhees have found a happier, healthier life living at Serenbe.
As we've lived in Serenbe, we've come to appreciate the people who are here and the diverse backgrounds and just amazing people, talented people. So I do think it attracts a kind of person who does want to make a difference.
All right. Want to welcome everybody back to Serenbe Stories this morning or afternoon this morning. And today we are very excited to have a really phenomenal resident that many of you may know, Penny McPhee. How are you, Penny?
I'm terrific, Monica. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk with Steve today.
And we're just delighted that you're joining the conversation. You know, we just are so proud that you chose to live at Serenbe and you've become such a part of the community. So looking forward to our conversation today.
As am I.
Yeah, Penny, you have had quite a storied career, which I want to dig into about all your time in Atlanta and prior, as well as you're a published author that I don't know if everybody knows about. I want to dig into that a little bit. But the first question we always ask everybody is, how did you discover Serenbe and what made you move?
This is a long story that could take the whole 35 minutes.
That's okay. We're here.
My husband Ray and I moved to Atlanta in 2004. Ray is a retired film director and producer, and he was asked by the Atlanta Regional Commission shortly after we got here, sometime in 2004, to work with them on a video about development in Atlanta. And among the topics was Serenbe. So we came down here. It was probably fall of 2004. And you can tell better than I what was here then. But what was mostly here was Steve and an idea in his head. And the farmhouse, of course. And I think the Daisy was here then. Not even sure about that. But we were like, wow, if this ever happens, which we don't really believe that it will, this is pretty cool. And then it was the only interesting thing, by the way, in the ARC video. Ray thought the rest was just, pure old-fashioned sprawl development. So we were kind of struck with this. And shortly after that, we learned that a longtime friend of ours, John Graham, lived here. We had known John when he was the executive director of the Florida Philharmonic in Florida. And I had that time was working for the Knight Foundation, which was a big supporter of the Florida Phil. So John invited us down several times. And Steve and I were just talking yesterday. One of the times that John invited us was to come and see the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And I don't really exactly remember, Steve, what happened to the bus.
Well, it was, we had a dinner at the farmhouse for VIPs, and Penny and Ray certainly qualified for that. And then we had 2 chartered buses to take people out to the pasture, and we had the full Atlanta Symphony. This was it was a 3-year program with Starbucks to bring culture out to more rural areas. And so it was just an incredible event. And it had been raining the days before and, not a problem because this was a big stage. And so the buses came out, everyone got out, went and incredible. And the bus then had pulled off to the side, and everyone afterwards came and got in the bus. And no one noticed that the one bus was in a rather soft spot. And by the time everyone got on the bus, it had sunk just enough that you couldn't open the doors, and the bus was stuck and couldn't pull out. And so we had,
and we were
we had 40.
Oh, you were
we
on
had
it.
40 VIPs
We were on it.
stuck inside a bus, and they can't get out. And after about 45 minutes of trying and everything, we found some sort of boxes, and I forget, ladder. And all of our VIPs, including Penny and Ray, had to crawl out the window of the bus to get out of this thing.
Yeah. So that was an experience.
Welcome to Serenbe.
Right. But, the genesis of this was so interesting because we also became very close friends with Diane and Richard Cohen. Diane, at that time, when I first moved here to work at the Blank Foundation, Diane was the commissioner for parks in Atlanta. And the foundation was doing a huge amount of acquisition of land to create parks. So Diane and I became friendly. And then we decided, well, let's get our guys together and see what happens. And they became very friendly. So the Cohens invited us down a number of times, mostly for the Playhouse, to see whatever the current production of the Playhouse was. And, we watched the growth of the Playhouse. The first production we came to was called A Walk in the Woods, and it was like a 2-person production. Mm-hmm. And it grew and grew and grew, and we're theater goers, so we love that. We love that element, and it was always fun to come down and stay with the Cohens for the weekend. But I think the biggest driver ultimately is that from the time we arrived in Atlanta, Ray had respiratory issues that he had never had in Miami. Mm. And everybody thought at the beginning that it was allergies because Atlanta, has all these pollen issues. But the truth is, it took us a long time to figure out that it wasn't allergies. It was pollution in Atlanta, and it was the ozone, and it was the worst in the summer when that inversion happens. And he was miserable. So we looked for solutions to that. And one summer, I don't know, maybe in 2009, 5 years after we arrived, we spent the summer at Big Canoe because we thought, well, maybe being in the mountains would be good. And it did help his breathing, but we didn't really like Big Canoe. There was kind of no community there. It just wasn't for us. And then I think, Diane or other friends of ours here in Serenbe said, well, you should try Serenbe because even though it's not in the mountains, we have no kids with asthma. They bragged about no kids with asthma. And something about the wind coming from Alabama. I don't know. You all know this better than I do. Steve can explain it. So we rented for a summer in Serenbe, and Ray was much better. So I'm then saying to myself, if there's a solution this close to Atlanta, I really can't keep him in Atlanta. And that was the beginning of when we started thinking about a move to Serenbe.
I was going to say, Steve, do you have the answer?
Well, yeah. It is the prevailing winds in this area blow northeast. And so we have all the clean forest, some 2 million acres southwest of us that's blowing fresh air in. And so although we're close to the airport, all of the pollution from the airport blows away from us to the northeast. And if you look at the high pollution days, I think there's 12 monitoring stations around Metro Atlanta. And the lowest reading is always the one between Carrollton and Noonan. And the highest one is south or northeast of Stone Mountain. So it makes sense. And so this is why I said it's important that we save the forest south of Atlanta. It's just not about land preservation. It's an air quality issue for all of Metro Atlanta.
Yeah. And I honestly, I think, I really believe in my heart that Ray's health has not only stabilized, but has improved since we've been in Serenbe. And I think a lot of it is the air. A lot of it is the community. So Ray has always been a very introverted, guy. He doesn't need a lot of friends. He's totally happy with his books and his computer. And Serenbe has really brought him out in a way that was totally unexpected, and has just been divine.
He's out and about saying hello to people on the street.
Well, I insisted that our dogs that we had in Buckhead had both died. And he was like, I don't know, do I want another dog? And I like, yes, you're getting a dog, because that is going to get him out. And that, of course, he now can tell me the names of all the dogs in Serenbe. He might not know the person's name. He knows the dog's name.
I absolutely love that. Well, Penny, you mentioned that you had come to Atlanta in 2004, I think. So tell us a little bit before we dig into your time here. So where were you before? You had actually quite a big career before you got to the Blank Foundation, which I know a lot of people focus on now, which I want to talk about. And you had this beautiful, everybody should read, beautiful article in Arts ATL recently, because you just retired from the foundation. So I encourage everybody to read it, because I learned a ton about you. But for the listeners, tell us a little bit how your career arc, where you grew up, and then kind of how you ended up coming back to Atlanta.
Thanks, Monica. Another long story. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, the daughter of a surgeon and a homemaker. And I knew from a very, very, very early age that I wanted to change the world, and that writing was my talent. And it was encouraged, and, I was blessed and lucky to have the family that I had and the resources and et cetera. So I always, from probably my junior year in high school, planned to be a journalist. And my dad knew the publisher of the then Louisville Courier-Journal, which at that time, in the age of newspapers, was actually a really good newspaper. And he called Barry Bingham and said, Barry, my daughter wants to be a journalist. Where should she go to college? Now, the colleges that I had been considering were Northwestern, because of journalism, and Wellesley, because of liberal arts. And Barry told my dad, we never hire anyone directly out of undergraduate. She should go get a great liberal arts education, and then she should go to Columbia School of Journalism. So, like the focused little girl I was, I went to Wellesley and went to Columbia School of Journalism. And I did look at journalism, and I still do. And it's an important part of who I am, as a way to shine a light on things that aren't right in our society. So I finished college, finished graduate school, took a job at what was then the CBS affiliate in Miami, where Ray, my now husband, was my boss. So that's how we met. But that also meant I couldn't really stay in that job. That became a kind of nepotistic thing. So I went to work at the public television station in Miami, and ultimately became the executive producer there for all of their non-news programming. What that means is their arts programming, especially, that was sort of my forte, but also their sports programming, anything that wasn't hard news. And in 1980, the Knight Foundation, which was created by the brothers who started Knight Ridder newspapers, moved their foundation from Akron, Ohio to Miami, because the newspaper company was headquartered in Miami, and one of the brothers had recently died. The other brother was living in Miami. And I literally saw an ad in the newspaper that said the foundation was looking for an arts and culture program officer. And I said to Ray, that job has my name on it, even though I was totally happy at the television station. And he said, what are you talking about? You don't know anything about foundations. And I said, and this turned out to be so prophetic that I tell young women this all the time, you have to look at what your skills are, not what your jobs were. And I said, I really think that being a program officer is exactly like being a TV producer. it's either having a good idea or more likely recognizing somebody else's good idea and then bringing together the elements to implement it, to make it happen. And I thought my communication skills were up to the task.
And what year was that, Tim?
Ultimately, I got the job, which I really loved. And I was at Knight Foundation for 14 years in progressively, positions of increased responsibility, so that by 2004, I had been the vice president for programs and the chief operating officer for about 5 years at that point in time, 5 or 6 years at that point in time. And I loved it. I wasn't looking to leave. Miami is such an interesting community, and it changed radically while Ray and I were there. So from like the early 70s to the early 2000s, it became an international city. We went through all of the ups and downs of the Cuban immigrations, good and bad. We went through the drug dealing and shootings, but we really liked Miami, and I liked it more than I had in the early days. But a headhunter called me, and she said, "We're looking for a president of the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation. Do you know who Arthur Blank is?" And I didn't have a clue. So then she explained Home Depot. Well, we loved Home Depot. And one of the reasons that we loved Home Depot is in itself an interesting story. But Ray and I were in Miami. So Hurricane Andrew literally destroyed the home we were living in at that time. And Home Depot was a hero in Miami at that time. It was a pretty young, up-and-coming company. It was one of the only companies that didn't increase its prices at the time of the hurricane. It really helped people in the community. So we knew Home Depot. But still, that wasn't really enough for me to say I'm ready to leave the Knight Foundation. So she said, well, listen, you should just come and interview Arthur. It's always good to keep your hand in. You never know what's going to happen at the Knight Foundation. So I said, okay. And really, the rest is history. I met Arthur. I was blown away by his vision for what he wanted to do in Atlanta through his family foundation. And we moved south to Atlanta because Miami is not the South, but Atlanta is the South. So that was in 2004. And it was that year that we first came and saw Serenbe. And then, the Blank Foundation has just been a perfect fit for me. I've been very blessed in my career to have 3 jobs that at the moment I had them were the perfect fit. First at public television, then at Knight Foundation, and then Blank Foundation. Very few people are that fortunate to be able to, have that kind of professional experience and really grow and be surrounded by amazing people and supported by an amazing team in each of those places. So,
and had you been to Atlanta before? Because I know that you had written a couple of books that I just want to touch on, because I know it's not sort of the primary thing that people know you for, but I was fascinated that this had these 2 books that were both on MLK come out of the work that you were doing at public radio. And if so, did you come to Atlanta during that time to do research? I'd love to hear that story. Those were in the 70s and 80s.
Yes. So another whole chapter. We had a very good friend in Miami who was a Time Life photographer. His name was, he's deceased. But he was an amazing photographer. And during the civil rights, and he was enough older than me that he had experienced the civil rights era firsthand and taken photos for Time Life. Most of his photographs were of Dr. King and his family and his colleagues. Flip did not take the kind of, the dogs and hoses and Selma or the bus boycott in Montgomery. He took intimate family pictures of Dr. King, and he had an amazing collection, and he wanted to do a book, a photographic book. And no publisher was interested. This was in, I guess, around 1976, because I think I had my daughter Cameron, so mid-70s. Finally, W.W. Norton, which was a quality publisher, said, okay, we'll do this cocktail table book of photographs pro bono. It'll be our pro bono book this year, and nobody will get paid for it. But Flip, being Flip, really wanted people to see the photographs. That was way more important to him than the money. And, at that time, Dr. King was still a bit of a controversial figure, which was why no publishing company, most white, were interested in it. But we did the book, and he came to me and said, listen, there's not going to be any money in this. But he knew I was a writer. Would you just do the cut lines for the pictures, for the photographs? And I said, sure. And I really, I was a bit too young to have experienced the civil rights movement. My era was really Vietnam. But I was genuinely interested. And it soon became obvious that a picture is not worth 1,000 words, and that you actually had to have text more than just cut lines. So what started out as a really easy project became a much bigger project because I decided to use as many of Dr. King's own words as possible for the text of the book. So that meant I read all of his books. And of course I read about him, but I really excerpted a lot of his own writing. For that book, which was called Martin Luther King, A Documentary, Montgomery to Memphis, the book was published. Mm-hmm. All of the proceeds went to the King Center in Atlanta. But for that book, I didn't do any original research. I didn't do any interviews. I didn't come to Atlanta to answer your question. But I learned a tremendous amount. And of course, none of us got any money. So that was okay. In 1986, Congress was creating the first King holiday. And W.W. Norton came back to Flip and me and said, let's do another book in honor of the holiday. We want this to be primarily text with some photographs, a centerpiece of photographs, but we want it to be aimed at the young adult reading audience. And I had the genuine honor of being the author of that book, which was called King Remembered. So for that book, I came to Atlanta, that was probably in 86, and interviewed all of Dr. King's then living lieutenants. So,
amazing.
Ralph Abernathy, Dr. Lowry. I did not interview Coretta, but I interviewed all of his lieutenants, and that for me was transformational. That was probably, of all of my professional experiences, and I've done a lot of interviews in all these years, those interviews were truly transformational. And the one that I remember the best was the interview with Dr. Ralph Abernathy, because he was Dr. King's closest friend. He was with Dr. King when he was murdered. And I had been trying to set up this appointment with Dr. Abernathy, and it was like moved, and it was back and forth and up and down. And finally he said, well, come to my church on Wednesday night. That's when we have our social evening. And then after that, we'll do the interview. So I did. And of course, he got tied up and he had someplace else he had to go. So he said, okay, we'll do the interview in the car. And he had his driver was in the front, and Flip was in the front seat with the driver. And Dr. Abernathy and I were in the back seat, and I had a little tape recorder, and we talked. I appreciated the Atlanta traffic more than because we really had a good half hour at least for this interview. But by the end of it, I was in tears because he literally walked me through the day and the night that Dr. King was assassinated and what he did and what everybody else did. And it was just remarkable. But I think, the thing that impressed me in interviewing all of Dr. King's associates was how forgiving they are and how much grace they have to continue doing the hard work that they all did even after that tragedy. They're just remarkable men in their own rights. So that was an amazing experience.
Are those interviews available anywhere? Are they secured?
So, Steve, the biggest tragedy of Hurricane Andrew, those recordings were in my house. And they were blown away, destroyed. That was the biggest loss that we had, really, because, the material things you can replace. And we were very fortunate that our family photographs were in the one room that stayed dry.
Wow.
That was a blessing. But I've given a lot of thought to that afterwards, when you have to leave a place because of some kind of impending disaster, what you take with you. And I didn't have any choice because we were on a cruise when Hurricane Andrew struck. So we didn't know that it was coming when we left on the cruise. So we didn't take anything with us. But, I thought about it and I would have probably said, okay, we need to take my jewelry. But would I have thought to take the family photographs? Would I have thought to take the King interview, the King Remembered interviews? I don't know if I would have, but now I certainly know what we treasure.
Well, and I'll tie that in because the Blank Foundation then, and I would love to know, how much influence you had on this, became one of the top organizations to raise money to ensure that King's papers not only stayed in Atlanta, but I think stayed together. So that kind of can tie us into talking about the foundation a little bit. But was that you? Or I'm sure Arthur was involved, but
it was my influence for sure, but a very willing donor and family. So when Shirley Franklin, who was then mayor, and Andy Young decided to try to create a museum, the Center for what became the Center for Civil and Human Rights, we were among the early committed donors. And that project took a long time because you'll all remember that the 2008 recession happened and it really slowed down their fundraising in the same way that it slowed down the progress in Serenbe. There was just not the time to try to raise money. But we had made a commitment, an early commitment to the museum. And around the same time, Dr. King's heirs decided to put his papers in auction at Sotheby's. And again, Shirley Franklin and Andy said, we cannot let these papers leave Atlanta. So Arthur, the foundation, several banks either donated or loaned money to acquire those papers. I think the total cost was I want to say $23 million. But they did it quite quickly. And yes, we were part of that. And I was ecstatic that we did that. And, we're now a major donor, I should say, the foundation. I still say we, but the foundation is still is a major donor of this new capital campaign that the Center for Civil and Human Rights is undertaking to expand. Because in 2008, because of the recession, they had to pull back on their original design and they didn't create the full plan that they had envisioned. So now there's an opportunity to, reimagine the center and add the wings that they couldn't build originally, which will include, and I think this is really important, a family exhibit, because one of the things about the center and its location, it's right by the Children's Museum, the World of Coke, the aquarium, but it's not really appropriate for young children. You have to be, probably at least a middle schooler to the center. So to have a family exhibit where younger children can come with their families and understand, even if they don't understand the history of the civil rights, understand the concepts of fairness and justice, which are really values that you want to teach your children early. So I think it's going to be terrific.
Well, that's exciting. I hadn't realized that, I knew when it opened and have been there, and it is a very powerful museum. And you're right. It is, my kids went when they were sort of in the upper elementary. It was tough. They came back changed, so it's exciting to hear that, and that will definitely follow what's happening. But you mentioned the aquarium. So Arthur Blank Foundation has really, I want to say, almost touched every institution here in Atlanta. And one of the big things is obviously the arts and museums. I think children's healthcare also you guys have supported quite a bit. And the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, I was fascinated with the arts program there that you kind of got woven into that. And I think that's a beautiful thing where, many of us, if you don't get to a museum or you only go once a year, maybe you go with your kids, to have exposure to the arts and to new artists in a sporting venue is very cool. So tell us how that kind of came to be.
So you have to understand that, first of all, Arthur thinks of all of his enterprises as one great business. It's not a separate stadium, Falcons, Atlanta United, Foundation, ranches in Montana. It's all one big enterprise. So when he thinks about how he's going to implement a project, he pulls people for their talents across the businesses. And he had seen the very, really museum quality art at the Dallas Stadium, the Cowboys Stadium.
Oh, okay.
And that was, I think, maybe the inspiration for, let's think about art in the stadium. But he wanted to think about it completely differently. In Dallas, they were more pure art objects that were beautiful, and some very, very, very well-known artists and acclaimed artists. But they weren't really integrated into the stadium. They weren't sending a message in the stadium. So Arthur wanted to make the art much more accessible, have it in all of the concourses, not just in the suites, not just in the clubs, but really throughout the stadium, which meant commissioning some huge murals for a concourse, because, a piece of art like the one behind me gets lost in a stadium. And we spoke with a number of different consultants who we thought might help us do the work in the stadium. One was the consultant from San Francisco who worked in Dallas, and she said never again. So that wasn't going to happen. I don't know whether that was about the owner in Dallas or about the project, but you can imagine. And then we spoke to a group who had done a number of they'd done Yankee Stadium. They were two women from New York. They had done a number of stadium projects, but we didn't think their vision was grand enough. They had mostly sports related art. That didn't really ring our bell either. So we ended up, and I think Arthur's son, Kenny Blank, suggested that we reach out to SCAD. We didn't know this at the time, but SCAD has schools and museums all over the world. And they are extremely entrepreneurial. And they did an amazing job bringing to us artists from all over the world and Georgia, because it was important to us that we had both local artists, but also international artists. And then we had a committee of which I was honored to serve that looked at the art and said, let's have this artist do a proposal, this artist do a proposal, whatever. But the normal way that you commission art. But it was an amazing process because it was a big risk going with SCAD, who had never worked in a stadium before. We had no idea if they could really implement. They were fabulous. And the collection is really diverse. The artists are racially diverse, women and men, all parts of the country, a big Georgia collection. If you've been to the stadium, you've seen that enormous falcon sculpture outside the stadium that was produced by a Hungarian artist and flown over here in segments to be put together and installed here. So it's really a remarkable public art collection. And I have a passion for public art. It's one of the things that I want to work on here in Serenbe. But this is a special collection because you don't have to go to a game to see it. You can, there are tours in non-COVID times, there are tours of the collection. And even in non-COVID times when the stadium is open, you can walk through and see some of the art right, by the store, for example. Mm-hmm. It was a privilege.
I just think that's so great to just sort of get art out from, I love a museum, I love galleries, but get it out. And I love that you were saying that it's not, locked away in suites. It's like for the public, it very democratizes it. So that's an amazing accomplishment. What a cool thing that you were able to work on, even though that wasn't, your core area. So I love that he brings people together like that.
Right. No, it was exciting. And, I don't know if you're familiar with the Hillel quote that says, if not now, when, if not me. That is one of the first pieces of art that you see when you walk into the stadium.
Okay.
And that's because Arthur apparently has carried that quote in his wallet, in his pocket for years.
And I was going to say, Steve, we should quote the whole thing, because I know Ray Anderson had said that quote to you, Steve.
It's that quote that Ray Anderson used to finally push me through that threshold of passion to actually redefine myself as a developer and step out of retirement. So that's a very familiar quote that Monica hears me repeat several times.
It's a wonderful quote. It's a wonderful quote. And I think, we should all realize that we have agency, right? We can make a difference. And, whatever that might be, sometimes we get so bogged down that all these things, these crazy things are happening in the world and we have nothing, we can't do anything, but we do have agency. So I think that quote is really beautiful.
And it leads into the period of time we're in, because there's certainly a lot of people complaining about all sorts of things on all sorts of levels. And I think we do have to realize that we need to step back and understand what we can change and what we do have control of. That's why I always say that we just tried to protect our own backyard. We never expected it to come into this. And Penny, you're an example. I think the people who are retiring, especially as baby boomers start reaching retirement age, that our generation caused a lot of the problems we're living with today. We were the generation of love and peace in the 60s, and we turned into the greed and selfish generation of the 90s and 2000. And now in this next chapter, I believe we are all healthier and living longer than our parents' generation did. And it's our time to step into these responsible things. And, if not me, who, and if not now, when, is something that I think every retiring person looks at. And Penny, I know you look at that. I'm just so thrilled that you're at Serenbe, and I know you are taking on projects. It's just exciting to see all the people at Serenbe who are in their retired lives. We could never hire the people who are stepping in to do these incredible things.
No, it really is. And as we've lived in Serenbe, we've come to appreciate the people who are here and the diverse backgrounds and just amazing people, talented people. So I do think it attracts a kind of person who does want to make a difference. And I think I certainly look forward to that.
People often say they just feel Serenbe when they arrive here. And I said, it's rare that you're in an entire community filled with hope. And I think that is what you find here.
So, for the first, I guess, that we had the home in Serenbe, but we also still had a condo in Midtown, and I was still working and commuting on the weekends. And I would drive into Serenbe on Friday night, and I could feel my blood pressure go down. It was just a breath of fresh air. And it's interesting too, when we sold our home in Buckhead, the two things that I thought I was really going to miss the most were my kitchen, because I had just redone the kitchen, and our gardens, because we did have a fabulous garden in Serenbe, and it was really, I treasured it. I have not missed either one of those things. And part of the reason is that Serenbe is a garden. All of Serenbe gives me that. I'm sitting in my office now, looking out into the trees. I watch and hear the birds all the time, but I don't have to take care of it. That's a blessing. But the other thing, that really has grown on us, that took a little more time, the nature part is immediate. You sense that immediate. The community, the people, and the shared values of the folks who live here. And by shared values, that doesn't necessarily mean that, they're all progressive Democrats or whatever, but they have an appreciation for nature, art, the whole concept of sustainability, the concept of living together in community that is rare. And we're pretty fortunate.
And that includes people on extremes of both political parties. That's the interesting thing. So it's not, it has nothing to do with that. That's great. Well, Penny, this is, one thing we always want to share with our listeners, for those that don't live here, is if someone's coming to Serenbe for a first time or have visited several times, what's something you would suggest they seek out and find? Something that maybe surprised you or that isn't obvious?
Well, I think it's easy to come to Serenbe and go to the farmhouse and maybe have a drink or a meal, or go to the Daisy and have lunch or a cup of coffee. I think you really do miss something if you don't take the time to walk in the woods and actually get lost a little bit in the woods. And Steve, you'll appreciate this. When we first got here, I walk a lot, as you know, and I got lost all the time. And I was very frustrated that there weren't good trail signs. And the trail signs have improved in the time that we've been here. But I've come to appreciate more your notion that it's actually not so bad to get lost in the woods.
That's right. It helps us develop our sense of place and where north and south is.
Yeah, I still don't know where north and south is. But I do know how to find my way home.
That's great.
Well, Penny, thank you so much. This was such a joy. I can't wait to watch the next chapter as you're here, hopefully some public art. And I just want to thank you for taking the time today. This was an absolute joy. And I love hearing about your life and all the things you've done and what's coming next.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been fun for me and I hope interesting.
Definitely.
But I really,
very interesting. In fact, I learned some things about.
I was hanging on I was like, I want to know more.
Well, I really appreciate being offered this opportunity, and I'm here to help make Serenbe everything we all want it to be.
Thank you, Penny.
Thanks so much. Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please follow us and leave us a 5-star review. And visit our website to learn more about guests, episodes, and everything Serenbe at serenbestories.com. This episode is supported by the Inn at Serenbe, nestled in the rolling countryside of the bucolic community of Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of private trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. Relax at the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on a wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, grab a canoe, and jump on the in-ground trampoline. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in a luxurious space at the Inn at Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com, SerenbeInn.com.